All right. So we're picking back up where we left off from last week. We were looking at the timeline, discovering a little bit about the proliferation of the church, the splitting of the church, the creation of denominations and people's groups. For instance, we talked about um, we spoke about the Asian or the Oriental Orthodox Church, which has hundreds of millions of people in it that you probably did not know existed. And we're going to pick that up right now. So let's go see if we can't find that.
It's going without you. That's right.
Yeah, we're going to back that up a little bit. See if we can't. Eastern Orthodoxy. So we're going to back up a little more. I probably hit with my finger. And okay, so we did that. We'll just start right there. Let's see. What's our timing look like? 28:11. Okay, hold on a minute. Yeah, we're going to stop right there. Let's see if I can do this. Not going to let me do that. So weird. Okay, well, we're going to go with what we got. How about that? I got this this ad overshadowing my screen here. I can't get to my... There. Nope, there it came back again. Ah. There. Oh no. All right, let's try it this way. I'm not seeing any change in that at all.
It's not. Two of my granddaughters.
Okay, let's try hitting it and see what happens. Maybe it'll...
And how old are they?
14 and 17.
Oh my.
Nope.
What's the difference in Episcopalians and Catholics? Because
Okay.
I've got a real rosary hanging in the window, and I've got a Episcopal prayer beads. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be a long conversation.
Okay.
Under the impression it's the same thing.
Well, not exactly. We looked at the census and we said,
Right. Well, there's a
Not
bunch of
infallible.
differences.
and the only thing, he's only infallible. He can be fallible if he speaks what they call ex cathedra. Anyway, not from the seat of Peter. So he can say something and it's not law.
All right, wait a minute.
Yes. And we do not believe in transfer.
That's the problem.
Right, they do, right. There's a lot.
Oh, yeah, I came up with it.
Yeah, that was... Okay, I think that was the problem.
Oh, I wish my husband was still.
Yep.
And officially, the UOCMP has now cut ties with the Russian Orthodox Church.
Okay, remember this from last week?
Secondly, there
Yeah.
was also
Yeah.
a disagreement
Remember the
between the newly appointed leader of the OCU, Epiphanius, and the former leader of the UOCKP, Philaret. This disagreement led to Philaret attempting to revive the UOCKP, although so far he's had only limited success. So basically, while there is still some disunity, the new OCU is now the main Eastern Orthodox Church in Ukraine. Now, before we move on, I do want to point out the growing rift between the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople and the Patriarch of Moscow. For over 500 years now, Moscow has seen itself as being the third Rome. And since the Russian Orthodox Church is by far the largest of the various Eastern Orthodox churches, it has at times been seen as a sort of rival to the leadership of Constantinople. In fact, when the Ecumenical Patriarch recognized the new Orthodox Church of Ukraine, Moscow decided to break communion with Constantinople, which basically means that they're no longer on good speaking terms. This was made even worse when Patriarch Kirill came out as a strong supporter of the war on Ukraine, whereas Patriarch Bartholomew strongly opposed it. So it's yet to be seen whether or not the current schism will turn out to be a landscape-changing, permanent one. Okay, let's now talk about the Roman Catholic Church, by far the largest church in all of Christianity, with well over 1 billion members, representing more than 50% of all Christians. Now, when most people refer to the Roman Catholic Church, what they're really referring to is the Latin Church, which is actually just one of 24 churches that make up the entire Roman Catholic Church. The other 23 churches are Eastern Catholic churches, which we'll be talking about shortly. But since 99% of Catholics belong to the Latin Church, let me take a moment to explain how the church organizes those 1 billion plus members. So unlike how the Eastern Orthodox churches are primarily based in single countries with perhaps some churches overseas, mainly for expats, the Roman Catholic Church is spread all over the world. So what they do is divide the world into a few hundred provinces like this. So for example, although I'm not a Catholic, I live within the Catholic province of Vancouver, which includes most of British Columbia. Within that ecclesiastical province are 5 dioceses, and each one of those dioceses is led by a bishop. However, one of those dioceses is an archdiocese, led by an archbishop, who, in addition to being in charge of his diocese, is also in charge of the entire province. Now, within each diocese are a bunch of parishes, or local churches, each run by a parish priest. So the closest Catholic church to me happens to be this one, although I also happen to live fairly close to a cathedral. Growing up, I always thought a cathedral was simply an extra big and fancy church. Well, that's not quite the case. Each diocese has just one cathedral, and it's called that because that's where you'll find the bishop or archbishop for that diocese. Of course, the most notable thing about the Catholic Church is that above all the bishops and archbishops in the hierarchy is the Pope, who is the leader of the entire church. That person is currently Pope Francis, who is also the bishop in charge of the Diocese of Rome. So basically, whoever is in charge of Rome is in charge of the entire church. Now, like I mentioned earlier, in addition to the main Latin Church, there are also 23 other smaller churches, which are the Eastern Catholic churches. These operate independently from the main church, but are still under the jurisdiction of the Pope. Of the 23 Eastern Catholic churches, I am going to point out just the 10 largest. Let's start here at the bottom. These 3 churches all trace their origins to the Church of the East, which I mentioned earlier. Basically, what happened is that in 1552, there was a schism in the Church of the East that resulted in some congregations remaining in the Church of the East. These are the ones that became the Assyrian Church of the East and the breakaway Ancient Church of the East. But at the same time, there were other congregations that decided to join the Catholic Church instead. These became known as the Chaldean Catholic Church. Then there are the St. Thomas Christians from India. These Christians trace their origins back to the Apostle Thomas, who supposedly traveled all the way to India in the 1st century. At some point, though, the Christians in India became associated with the Church of the East. But then later, some joined the Oriental Orthodox churches, becoming known as the Indian Orthodox Church, while others joined the Catholic Church, becoming known as the Syro-Malabar Catholic Church. The Syro-Malankara Catholic Church is also based in India and consists of congregations that broke away from the Indian Orthodox Church. So note that there are 2 different Eastern Catholic churches based in India. The Syro-Malabar one follows Eastern Syrian traditions, whereas the Syro-Malankara one follows Western Syrian traditions. The largest Eastern Catholic Church is actually the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, with over 5 million members. This church traces its roots back to the Ruthenian Orthodox Church that I mentioned earlier. So basically, back in the 1500s, there were some Christians in Ukraine that didn't want to join the Russian Orthodox Church, so they joined the Catholic Church instead. Now, there's also a Ruthenian Greek Catholic Church, but it actually has nothing to do with the Ruthenian Orthodox Church. It actually formed when certain congregations broke away from the Serbian Orthodox Church. Then there's the Armenian Catholic Church, which, as you might have guessed, is based on those who broke away from the main Armenian Church, which is associated with Oriental Orthodoxy. That leaves us with the Coptic Catholic Church, which broke away from the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate in Alexandria, and these three, which all broke away from the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Antioch. Which means that when it comes to the original Pentarchy, we now have way more than 5 patriarchs for 5 cities. So as I mentioned last time, there's an Oriental Orthodox Patriarch of Alexandria, who uses the title of Pope, but there's also a Greek Orthodox one. Well, now you know that there's a third Patriarch of Alexandria too, a Catholic one, who is the leader of the Coptic Catholic Church. In Antioch, it's even more complicated. There's the Oriental Orthodox Patriarch and the Greek Orthodox Patriarch. But there's also 3 different Catholic Patriarchs representing the 3 different Catholic churches based in Syria. Now, I should mention, which I failed to do last time, that the city of Antioch is now actually located in Turkey. But for most of history, it was associated with the region called Syria. In Rome, of course, it's simple. There's just one patriarch, Pope Francis. And in Constantinople, it's mostly simple. There's mainly just Bartholomew I, the spiritual leader of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Although technically the Armenian Church has a patriarch there too. Finally, in Jerusalem, there are 3 patriarchs. There's the main patriarch, who is Eastern Orthodox, but there's also a Catholic patriarch who represents the Latin Church, as well as an Armenian patriarch. So that takes care of the official branches of the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches. But before I go, I want to point out a few unofficial or independent branches. In 1870, the Roman Catholic Church held a council that is now known as Vatican I. One of the things that the council decided was that the Pope is infallible. Now, this doesn't actually mean that the Pope never makes mistakes or that he has the power to radically change church doctrine. It actually only applies to special statements that are clearly made ex cathedra, meaning from the chair. Well, there were some Catholics that disagreed with the idea of papal infallibility, among other things. And there happened to be an archbishop in the Dutch city of Utrecht who had already gone independent. So basically, after Vatican I, a bunch of other priests joined with that archbishop to form the Old Catholic Church, also known as the Church of Utrecht. Today, they are led by this man here. Something similar happened in the 1960s, following the council known as Vatican II. One of the main things to come out of that council was the decision to hold Mass in local languages instead of Latin. Again, there were some Catholics who disagreed with the various decisions made at the council. This time, those who separated and formed independent Catholic churches became known as sedevacantists, which is a word based on the Latin for empty chair. Basically, these Catholics believe that the office of Pope has been vacant ever since Vatican II. One of the main sedevacantist churches is the Congregation of Mary Immaculate Queen in Nebraska. The Eastern Orthodox Church also has independent branches. There, the separatists are known as Old Calendarists, or True Orthodox. The main issue for them was the switch that the Eastern Orthodox Church made in the 1920s from using the old Julian calendar to the new Julian calendar. Today, most Old Calendarists are found in Romania and Greece. Okay, so that was a look at the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox branches of Christianity. In the next episode, we'll be moving on to the Protestants and Restorationists. And this is where the tree starts to really go in a bunch of different directions. So you can expect that there will be several episodes on the Protestants and Restorationists before we're done.
All right, so
What about Catholics in Africa and Latin America?
Yeah.
Not
They're just down that.
chain.
That's down that. They're not separate. That's why he said there are Catholics all over the world
Mm-hmm.
that all fall under the Bishop of Rome. So they're not distinguished in any way from that straight line that went straight down. That went to Protestants. So these other ones, these old Catholics or the sectionalized Catholics are weirdly independent, but not. They're almost like they're more like this. They're more like the Eastern Orthodox Church, where you have a head. The ecumenical patriarch is supposed to be head over all these, so he would be equal to the Pope, right? Theoretically, but then each one of these are independent. So the Pope is head over all these church, and he's head over these too, but they're weirdly independent. So they answer to the Pope, but they really do their own thing. That's why I was telling you about my professor at Catholic University, who was old Catholic, and they are completely. And he said we were really independent. We have all the old Eastern liturgies. We have all the same. The guy with the hat, the whole, all that, because we follow the Eastern liturgy. But we are in the Catholic family. That's why he said we'll never get promoted. I'll never be bishop. I'll never be pope. They'll never make one of us. I'll never go. We never get on the. I'll never be a cardinal.
Do they go to the conclaves?
No, if they don't have a cardinal, they don't. But they're represented every other way. So they're supposed to be 100% in, but they're kind of not. So this is important for us because it really gives you an idea. Now remember, this tree transcends time. So we had these things happening. This one happened in 1054, so that's the split between East and West, right? This is the Great Schism, 999 or 1054, depending on which date you like better, and I'll explain it later on. A Great Schism that separated. Remember, prior to this, you had the five patriarchies. They were all on the same team. They're like, woohoo! But after that, these split up and became different heads of the church. They don't relate to each other anymore. So these guys would get together and talk about how the church was developing, what was happening. They would argue, they would debate. It was the patriarchies and the emperor that brought together the great councils of the church to make theological decisions. But then after the split, these guys didn't get together anymore. So this guy ran this group, this guy ran this group, this guy all ran these other groups. And they don't talk about how they're going to make the world go. They just make the world go, and then they get together and say, hey, we're doing it this way, and how are you doing it that way? And they can agree or not agree. So that is the source of ecumenical dialogue. Like interfaith dialogue. We have interfaith dialogue where we're talking, this guy's talking to this guy. And talking to that guy. So when the Pope gets together with the ecumenical patriarch, that's interfaith dialogue. And the ecumenical dialogue is talking with the Muslims and Jews and Hindus and like that. So that's why the Archbishop of Canterbury gets together with the Pope every year. They have a sit down. Sometimes it's in Canterbury, and sometimes it's in Rome. So they're having a sit down to say, okay, we want to be friends, we want to do this stuff together, and what can we do to make things better? And there used to be this idea. I won't jump too far ahead, but there used to be an idea that we were actually going to get somewhere doing that, but that's long since gone to bye-bye. I was involved in interfaith dialogue.
Episode 3.
Oh, stop.
I suppose the Irish Catholics are down that straight line too.
Yeah.
Well, when we were there were some people that were saying that they were Irish Catholics, not Roman Catholics.
So the only thing that is the creeping nationalism or sectarianism. So I am. We have it in the Episcopal Church. So the Anglican Communion is we're all Anglicans, and we're going to behave together as Anglicans. So we have councils that say, we get together every 3 years for all the bishops in the world get together, and we have every 10 years. Sorry, every 10 years is
3 is a triennial.
right. We have our own 3-year general convention, and then we take everything that we do from there and we send it off to Canterbury to be disseminated through the world. And then every 10 years, Canterbury gets everybody together to talk about all the stuff that it's gotten over the last.
Remember when we excluded?
Oh yeah, we still are.
Are we still excluded?
Yeah. We can sit, we can't vote. We have no voice, and some places we don't have a voice. So you can sit there, but you can't say anything.
Why bother?
So
I
that's
can see a breakaway.
so what you're pointing out is exactly what's happened.
Okay.
What you mentioned in Ireland. Okay, so
Okay.
that person is saying that that in Ireland we have these issues, we have these problems, we have this history, we're doing this stuff, and the church in Rome does not respect our stuff. So I am Irish first, considering our issues, and then I'm Roman Catholic. So I'm the Irish Catholic Church. I'm not the Roman Catholic Church because they don't do what I want them to do. So the U.S. did the same thing. The Episcopal Church in the U.S. said, this is where we're going, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, and we're Episcopalians, we're Americans first. And we did our thing, and we told them in the Archbishop of Canterbury, we told them what we're doing. And we won't go into this too much, again, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but the whole problem arose because it's like it'd be the same thing as we have a group here, right? And as a group, we agree that we're going to do something, you make a decision, and you're going to present the decision before you enact it to the group. And we're going to talk about it and why you made this decision and how it's going to work out and how it's going to work with us and how we can incorporate it, or if it's just not a good idea right now. And everybody can veto it. No, not going to work. Let's put it on the back burner and we're all going to study it. We're going to come to a place next time where we can actually do something about it, where we're in this together, because we're in this together, we're a group. Now what if Lee just came in and said, okay, I've got this thing, it's really great. I thought of it up. It's really fantastic. I really like it, and I'm just doing it. I've already started. It's really fantastic, and I've got it going on. It's all great. I've got all people happening. The rest would be like, what? That's not what we agreed on. This is a group. You're coming to the group. This is weird. You're coming to the group that you said would be a group by the way we share, telling us that you're doing it as not a member of the group. What? That's what the Episcopal Church did. That's also what the church in Ireland is trying to do. I heard the same thing. They're simply putting their nationality before their communion and fellowship.
You're gonna cover the Episcopal Church
Oh, yeah.
next week,
Yeah.
right? And all the
Well, when we get up, we're going to go...
the Episcopal, Anglican,
Yeah.
they're...
We'll get all into it. We're going to go through the great schism first. The split. Not the great schism is not... Well, I take it back. The great schism is the Eastern and Western, but then the next schism is the Protestant Reformation.
And there's always one. Always.
Yeah. All right, so now I wanted to show you, I don't know if we'll get through both of them, but I wanted to show you something that's going to preempt another thing that we're talking about, and it's called, this is pretty cool, and the guy does a great job of explaining
This
it.
video is brought to you by Captivating History.
There you go. Come on.
It is largely lost to recorded history.
Dark Ages.
Following the fall of Rome in 476 CE, the entire dynamic of Europe underwent a complete shift in power structure and culture. There is much dissension in terms of the window of time in which this period may have actually occurred. For this presentation, the Dark Ages is thought to have covered the era between the 4th century, when Rome fell, to the beginning of the 11th century, when the landscape of the primary countries of modern-day Europe began to take shape. In terms of the Dark Ages, most historians agree that the label is a misnomer. The term Dark Ages was coined by an Italian scholar named Francesco Petrarca, better known today as simply Petrarch. He believed the literature and innovation of this period were stunted when compared to the Roman Empire, perceiving the era to be void of the culture and progressiveness that existed in Western Europe before the Roman Empire lost control of the continent.
All right, I'm going to stop for a
Historians-
second. You're going to say, why? Why are you stopping? Because I'm going to show you why. You got that, right? Dark Ages. Now, what is the physical reason for that happening? What could be the reason? The Dark Ages are really weird. I'll tell you when we're all done next week. It's going to be next week. A completely alternate view of why the Dark Ages are the Dark Ages. Okay, so it's kind of... But this will explain how some of this whole process of the Dark Ages got going.
Just under 1,500 years ago, something terrifying happened to the world's climate. Something nobody could understand. The sun began to go dark. Rain the color of blood poured from the skies. Clouds of fine dust enveloped the earth. Winter gripped the land for 2 years. Then came drought, famine, plague, death. Whole cities were wiped out, civilizations crumbled, and nobody knew what had happened. It was a catastrophe that affected millions and millions of people all round the world. But what was it?
The mid-6th century catastrophe was the most important date in the history of the past 2,000 years. It really did lay the foundations of the world we live in today.
For 5 years, in the attic of his unassuming suburban home, David Keyes, a writer on history and archaeology, has immersed himself in a worldwide investigation. He's consulted over 80 experts on drought, famine, floods, cosmic and ecological disasters, epidemics and ancient wars. He's scoured the annals and chronicles of the 6th and 7th centuries AD from all over the world. His book tells the story of a catastrophic climatic event buried in the heart of the Dark Ages, which Keyes believes totally altered the course of history. The mystery, which has so tantalized him, began at a conference on archaeology in 1994.
One particular
I'm going to try to move a little farther forward.
It's changing weather, going back thousands of years. Every year, trees put on a new layer of growth within the bark. These layers show up as rings. Every ring varies in width. A wide ring is a year of good weather. The pattern of wide and narrow rings is distinctive. Here, for the last 7,500 years.
If you think about that,
So I'm trying to get us to the meat of it.
Position to be in. We can draw a line of these large spring vessels.
Let's see.
Large number of pieces
Ah.
of comet arriving.
All right. So I'm going to let this guy go for right now.
But could the sound of a volcanic eruption...
I have to get have to cue that back up for you next time. It's too long for me to try to find the thing. There is a good reason why. Remember the guy said the Dark Ages? This is starting around the 6th century. So it's 500. This is right around after the fall of Rome, just a little bit after the fall of Rome. So there's a good reason why that why it's called the Dark Ages. Because the sun went out for 2 years. But beyond the sun going out for 2 years, there was...
3,000 miles from Indonesia to China.
After the sun going out for 3 years, there was the seeming recovery of all the people, of the sun coming back. But the recovery to start producing again took much longer. So then the term Dark Ages went from literally the sun going out to the Dark Ages of people they weren't doing anything. They weren't producing anything. They weren't making, art and science and all this stuff just wasn't happening because the world was in a recovery status after losing billions of people to all of these other things, which we're going to look at in detail next week. Sorry.
It's a bunch of volcanoes.
It was a volcano. Yep. All right, so we're back to where we were the other one.
Well, they would be starving.
This video is brought to you by Captivating History. Period of approximately 6 centuries that is largely long.
All right, here we go.
Agree that the label is a misnomer. The term Dark Ages was coined by an Italian scholar named Francesco Petrarca, better known today as simply Petrarch. He believed the literature and innovation of this period were stunted when compared to the Roman Empire, perceiving the era to be void of the culture and progressiveness that existed in Western Europe before the Roman Empire lost control of the continent. Historians today now refer to the Dark Ages as the early Middle Ages, which is truly a more accurate description. The fall of Rome and the world after. For about 100 years before the fall of Rome, the city was in steep decline. Infighting, petty ambitions, and greed were commonplace within its leadership. This poor leadership and inefficient governing would lead to the inevitable loss of control of the conquered territories within the empire. Rome's inability to provide for the people on the outskirts of their borders would serve as the impetus for the attacks signaling the beginning of the end of ancient Rome. Skirmishes, like the Battle of Hadrianopolis in 378 CE and the invasion of the Visigoths in 410 CE, indicated Rome's loosening grip of power and triggered other Germanic tribes to challenge Rome for their own previously conquered territories. In 476 CE, a weakened Rome fell to the Germanic warlord Odoacer. Odoacer killed the father of the child emperor Romulus Augustulus, took control of the rest of his military, and offered the young emperor the option of retirement. The emperor wisely accepted and fled into exile for the rest of his life. This series of events was the end of the Western Roman Empire. The fall of Rome sent shockwaves across the continent. Western Europe splintered, and regions that had considered themselves under Roman rule began taking control of their own much smaller domains. The ensuing reconfiguration of the fallen empire naturally triggered many wars, as different tribes began to reclaim lost ancestral territories. Strong men from all corners attempted to take advantage of the power vacuum the defeat of Rome had created. The rise of the Christian Church. The Roman Empire practiced its own religious belief system, which we observe as Roman mythology. Still, the empire would typically allow conquered regions to continue with their own beliefs. The only exception was when something, or someone, directly challenged Roman authority. This more laissez-faire approach to managing their conquered territories created an ideal climate for the rise of Christianity as a religion. As Christianity grew across the regions, more and more of the Germanic tribes began to follow the teachings of Christ. By 313 CE, Emperor Constantine I issued the Edict of Milan, a proclamation granting legal status to a number of religions within the Roman Empire, including Christianity. In 325 CE, the emperor introduced the Council of Nicaea, whose core purpose was to establish the primary beliefs of Christianity. The council created the Nicene Creed, which cements the basic precepts and beliefs of Christianity in concise form. These events, and the resultant recognition, legitimized Christianity to the empire and the entire continent. By 476 CE, Christianity had become a clearly recognizable and powerful religion. So when Rome fell to the Germanic tribes who were Christian, people saw the empire's defeat as a sign that the Roman gods were not as powerful as the Christian God. With so many onlookers in Europe perceiving the fall of Rome as a religious sign, Christianity saw a vast and meteoric rise on the continent. Rome continues, the Byzantine Empire. The sacking of Rome and the removal of the last Roman emperor was not entirely viewed as an end to the Roman Empire. There were 2 major cities that ruled the Roman Empire, each of which had its own ruler. Rome was certainly where the empire started, but it became so large at its peak that it required a second city and second ruler to manage the far eastern side of the empire, Constantinople. Constantinople preserved the history and culture of the Romans long after the fall of the illustrious city, as well as establishing its own distinct culture. The split of the empire occurred in 285 CE under Emperor Diocletian. By dividing control with the city to the east, governing the two vast regions became more manageable. Rome was the capital for the western portion of the empire, and Byzantium was the capital of the eastern side. Byzantium would later be renamed Constantinople. Constantinople continued to thrive for many centuries, but inevitably fell to the Ottoman Empire. And citizens who were able to fled west as the city was attacked, taking with them the knowledge and the cultures of both historic Rome and Constantinople back to Rome and Italy. It is not a coincidence that the Italian Renaissance began near the end of the Byzantine Empire. Western Europe was by no means the uneducated, barbaric place that it is often portrayed to be during the Dark Ages, but it did not have the same connection to the Roman Empire as the inhabitants of Constantinople. The rise of the Caliphate. As Christianity continued to evolve and envelop much of Europe, a new religion was forming in what we now know as the Middle East, under the Prophet Muhammad. He held religious and political power over those who followed him. And as the seal of the prophets, those who followed Muhammad believed that he was the last prophet sent by God to walk the earth. Because of this belief, Muhammad's teachings were thought to be the final word from God, superseding the words of all other prophets. When the prophet died in 632 CE, he left his followers without an obvious successor or a system to choose a successor as the new religious leader. His followers chose one of Muhammad's fathers-in-law, Abu Bakr, as their new leader. Over time, a system of succession was developed around the belief that future Islamic leaders should be chosen from descendants of the Prophet, or those who were in some way related to him. This was the birth of the Caliph and the Caliphate. The term Caliphate refers to the dual political and religious state under Muslim laws, and the leader of a caliphate is called a caliph, which is similar in meaning to a king or emperor. During the height of the caliphate, their conquest included the Middle East, Northern Africa, and Southern Europe. The religion of Islam was adopted and spread to the areas under the caliph's control. However, the general population was not necessarily required to follow it in that period of history. The Caliphate Empire tried to extend into Europe, but it soon found that they were no match for the Germanic tribes that had adopted the military tactics of the Roman Empire. The Muslim army did have some success, however. They made their way largely unchallenged across what would one day become Spain between 711 to 713 CE. The Lombard Kingdom. The Lombards were a particularly interesting Germanic tribe, originating in the area around Scandinavia, but eventually migrating down to Italy, where they ruled for sporadically over 200 years. A handful of leaders were successful in expanding their kingdom beyond their original humble beginnings. The Lombards were one of the Germanic tribes that were part of the Great Migration, a period believed to be about 100 years, between 376 to 476 CE. These tribes began to move and settle into new regions, and like many other Germanic tribes, the Lombards sought to find a place that was more shielded from the Hun, a warlike Asiatic nomadic people who ravaged Europe in the 4th to 5th centuries. They settled in an area just north of the Danube region. By the middle of the 6th century, the Lombards' leader, Alboin, rose to power. Unlike previous leaders, Alboin took a greater interest in developing a more impressive and organized military system, establishing a military that was based on kinship. The head of each unit was a member of the nobility, such as a duke or a count, and the people under them were largely related to this leader. This was designed to provide a better connection and sense of camaraderie between the soldiers and their leader. In 567 CE, Alboin, his army, and their allied tribe, the Avars, ended a 20-year war with their enemies, the Gepids, by killing the last king of that tribe, Cunimund. Following that victory, tensions surfaced between the Lombards and the Avars. Instead of instigating another protracted war with no guarantee of success, Alboin decided that it was time for his people to leave the area. Since a portion of his military had served in northern Italy, the recommendation was to resettle there. The men remembered the region being very green and fertile, which served as an ideal location for reestablishing their agrarian lifestyle. Alboin and his military had greatly benefited from the years of war and service to other tribes, and the remains of the Roman Empire. As they progressed across northern Italy, the Lombards were able to easily take control of many of the cities in their wake. To be fair, there wasn't much resistance against them. The exception to this was Pavia, where the Lombards spent 3 years fighting before they finally were victorious. Their march and subsequent subjection of Italian territories were complete by 572 CE, and the Lombards had nearly all of Italy under their control. Charlemagne, one of the most noteworthy names to come from the early Middle Ages, was that.
All right, we're going to stop with Charlemagne. Sorry. We reached our time. So what I'm hoping that you saw in just this little bit, so we only got a little bit left. What I hope that you saw in just this little bit was that Christianity had a lot to do with everything that was moving up from the fall of Rome. And when Rome fell, but it was not the end of Christianity. In fact, it kept on going, some would say even stronger than it was before, because now it was being disseminated and becoming more pocket-driven, but maybe more authentic in a certain way, because the people were living out their Christian life as they knew it, instead of possibly doing it like because they're doing it. So this moves us up to Charlemagne, where all of this tumult is happening. The world is being reorganized. So if you didn't think of it before, you kind of went from Jesus to Rome, and then suddenly here we are in the world. Now you're getting to see that there's this big blocks of time where everything was just torn apart. The world was torn apart. It was seemed to be going into making itself smaller, like tribal almost. And then those tribes, as they contracted into a small group, started to expand back out again and then fight each other and vie for territory until we have the Lombards getting in control of Italy. So with the Lombards in control of Italy, you now can see the seeds of what's going to be the progenitors to the Italian government, the Italian people that we know today. Now remember that there were people already there. People lived in Italy. There were two main people groups. We'll talk about them next week, just a little bit to give you an idea. I've actually been talking about them last Wednesday night. I spoke about this because that's where we started. How we got the name Latin. The word Latin comes from a tribe that lived in an area of Italy, and some of the mythology came from the combination of Greek or Roman gods, the influence of Greek gods, and the influence of Tuscan gods from way down below, which are thought to be the progenitors of the Romans themselves, which is kind of iffy when you think about it. When you do that. So we're going to get up to Charlemagne, where we've broken into little pieces. Now Charlemagne's going to try to bring everybody back together. And that is going to be the progenitor for what happens next in Europe, and how we're going to get the churches that eventually are going to split. So we're already into the fives, right? So we're going to keep on going up quickly to about 1100. Just move through this. And once we get the details down about the Middle Ages, or the Dark Ages. Okay?
You see, everything moves in cycles. Comes
Yes.
together, splits, comes together, splits.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be any way to stop that from happening. It's just the way it works. Maybe that's just us. All right, see you next week.